AITA for taking down the queen bee only to become worse than her? When I transferred to my new school last year, I honestly thought my life was going to be one long stretch of invisibility. You know that feeling when you walk into a crowded cafeteria, tray in hand, and no one even lifts their head? That was me. Every day. I didn't know anyone, and no one wanted to know me. I sat at the corner table, chewing my sandwich like it was made of cardboard, pretending to scroll on my phone just so I wouldn't look so pathetically lonely. At first, I told myself it didn't matter. It was just school, right? Get through the hours, get the grades, get out. But loneliness has this way of creeping into your bones until it becomes heavier than the backpack you carry. I'd watch groups of friends laughing, tossing fries at each other, sharing inside jokes I'd never understand, and something in me ached. Not just for company, for belonging. The only people who ever acknowledged me were the teachers. Mr. Ramirez would nod when I turned in my English essays early. Mrs. Jacobs would compliment my neat handwriting on biology lab reports. But from the students? Nothing. I was a ghost that haunted the hallways, except no one was scared, because to them, I wasn't even there. That is, until they noticed me. The Diamonds. Even now, the name sounds both glamorous and terrifying. Everyone at Northview High knew them. Everyone. They weren't just popular girls, they were a phenomenon. 3 of them, always together, always shining like their nickname suggested. People either worshipped them like they were royalty or avoided them like they were cursed. There was Brianna, the leader. Tall, platinum blonde, perfect posture, perfect teeth, perfect skin. She had this way of walking into a room that made everyone subconsciously straighten their shoulders, as if the queen had arrived. If you crossed her, you were done. If you pleased her, you could ride her shadow into relevance. Then there was Lexi, the sharp-tongued brunette who always had a witty insult on hand. She wasn't as intimidating as Brianna, but her approval mattered just as much. If Brianna was the crown, Lexi was the scepter wielded to cut down anyone in their way. Finally, there was Tasha, the quiet but deadly one. She didn't speak much, but her gaze was enough to freeze you. People underestimated her because she smiled sweetly, but everyone knew she was the one who carried their secrets. Rumor had it she had dirt on half the school, and that's why no one dared to cross her. Together, they ruled the school like an empire. People called them the Diamonds because they sparkled under attention, because they were flawless, because they were untouchable. At least, that's how it seemed. And then, out of nowhere, they noticed me. I still remember the day as if it were etched into my brain. I was sitting at my usual corner table in the cafeteria, unwrapping my slightly squished peanut butter and jelly sandwich. I was halfway through convincing myself that if I just focused on chewing slowly, the lunch period would pass quicker when I heard a voice. Cute shoes. I looked up, startled. Standing in front of me was Brianna herself, all glowing hair and expensive perfume. For a moment, I thought I'd hallucinated her, like some mirage conjured by my desperate imagination. She was staring directly at my scuffed thrift store sneakers. The ones I'd found for $3.99 in the clearance bin, thinking they were quirky enough to pass as intentional. Thanks, I stammered. And then she did something no one expected. She smiled. "Want to sit with us?" she asked, her manicured finger pointing toward the glittering table where Lexi and Tasha sat, surrounded by a crowd of admirers. I froze. Was this some kind of joke? The Diamonds never invited strays to their table. If they noticed someone at all, it was usually to ridicule them. My brain screamed, "Say no, it's a trap." But my heart, my lonely, desperate heart, wanted to believe it was real. "Sure," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. That was the moment everything changed. As I followed Brianna to their table, I could feel dozens of eyes piercing into me. Whispers floated through the cafeteria like smoke. Who was I? Why me? Why was she the invisible nobody being escorted into the kingdom of the Diamonds? And just like that, it was settled. My existence had been validated by the queen herself. Over the next week, I found myself pulled deeper into their orbit. Brianna complimented me on my vintage jackets, Lexi begrudgingly included me in conversations, and Tasha would sometimes lean close to whisper things about other students that made me feel like I'd been handed classified intel. For the first time since transferring, I wasn't invisible. People looked at me in the hallways. They whispered my name, asked me questions, and even invited me to things. It was intoxicating. But there was a catch. Being part of their circle came at a price. At first, it was small. Lexi would jokingly tell me to ditch my old backpack because it looked tragic. Tasha would casually mention that if I wanted to fit in, I might want to consider wearing makeup. Brianna would suggest I copy her homework, as if it was no big deal. And because I was so desperate to belong, I complied. I bought a new backpack. I let Tasha smear mascara on my lashes in the girls' bathroom, and I copied Brianna's math answers even though I felt guilty. It was easy to justify at first. These were little sacrifices, right? Nothing serious. Just the cost of admission to their world. But then the requests got bigger. Much bigger. And that's when I started to realize that maybe I hadn't been invited in out of kindness. Maybe I was being recruited. Or worse, tested. When they handed me their rules, some of them said it was a joke, written in a group chat thread I wasn't even supposed to see. I stared at the bulleted list like it was a contract. It was simple. It was brutal. It was the kind of unspoken monarchy that makes the whole school tilt a little to their favor. Never gain more followers than Brianna. Never talk to a boy she claimed. Never disagree in public. If you broke a rule, they turned on you instantly. You think you've seen cruelty in high school? You haven't seen anything until you've watched 3 people coordinate the social death of someone they decided to erase. I saw it with my own eyes. Watched a girl I'd never met become nothing more than a cautionary tale. Her name was Amber. She had been on the fringe of 1,000 groups, one of those kids who floated from table to table, smiling at everyone, trying to be liked by all and truly belonging to none. One week she laughed at a joke Lexi made. The next, she wore a dress to school Brianna didn't like. The week after that, a rumor that Amber had hooked up with a teacher started leaking through hollow-lipped girls and anonymous accounts. Screenshots of Amber, cropped and captioned and doctored, started circulating. Kids who used to wave at her in the halls crossed to the other side of the corridor as if she'd become contagious. By Monday, she had become a ghost. Nobody answered her texts. Her locker notes stopped. Someone spray-painted liar on her hallway locker in messy slanted letters. She transferred schools 2 months later. Watching that happen changed something in me. I should have run the other way when Brianna offered me a seat at their table. I should have refused. But I had been hungry, starved for someone to notice me, and that hunger made me stupidly brave at first. I thought I could handle it. I could ride the high while being careful, like a spy in a crown's court. So I played along. I learned how to laugh at the mean jokes without letting my smile sway into shock. I learned how to take a selfie that matched their aesthetic, matching lips, matching eyes, matching the same little slant of vulnerability that Brianna cultivated in group photos. I bought the shoes they liked, the jacket they liked. I let Tasha contour my face in the bathroom with the hand lights on, feeling both ridiculous and oddly intimate when she said, "Just a little more here." I watched my reflection change piece by piece and thought of identity like a dress I could wear for an audience. That's the thing about belonging to a pack. Your edges get sanded down until you're smooth enough not to snag on anyone's expectations. But I was careful in other ways. I had this guilty, secret habit. I screenshot everything. The group chats where Lexi's jokes were more like barbed wire. The private messages Brianna sent to other girls where she'd say, "Don't trust her, she's clingy." The posts they made and then deleted. Fractal patterns of cruelty disguised as humor. At first it felt paranoid. Why collect evidence of catty comments and mean-spirited secrets? Because a small part of me, even as I laughed and copied and learned all their lines, suspected that this golden triangle was fragile. Because power built on fear is brittle. Because I could smell the rot beneath the glitter. And because, selfishly, I wanted something to anchor me if the pedestal cracked and I fell. If I was going to be honest with myself, I wanted insurance. That insurance would become everything. The day everything unraveled began like most school days, mundane, predictable, the same routine of lockers, bell, hallway chatter. But there was an edge in the air, like 2 people who both know a terrible secret and are about to see whose tamped-down anxiety will explode first. Brianna had a smile plastered on her face as always, but it looked different that morning, wider, practice perfect, like someone who'd rehearsed her mask. She waved me over to the bench outside the gym where they'd decided to eat lunch. Lexi had on sunglasses inside, always a move to signal drama, and Tasha was scrolling through her phone with the kind of slow attention that makes you think she's reading an obituary, deliberate and calm. "You're early," Brianna said, as if surprised and not surprised at all. "I had an English quiz," I lied. I'd stayed up the night before transcribing notes until the ink in my pen ran dry. It sounded pathetic, so I didn't expand. "They didn't care." "Good," Brianna said. "We need you." Her tone had that velvet edge I'd started recognizing, the kind of softness that precedes a demand. I felt my stomach drop. I sat, palms sweaty, phone in hand. My screenshots were tucked on my phone in a folder I labeled insurance because I'm great with subtlety, apparently. So Lexi started, "We're doing something big tonight." They always used we like it was a weather report, inevitable, sweeping, cold. Tasha didn't look up. Brianna's eyes flicked to mine, and they were sharper than usual. "You in?" she asked. It took me 2 seconds to think of the answer that would keep my place at the table and another second to hear the voice in my head that had started collecting evidence months ago. "Yes," I said. The plan was ridiculous and petty and designed, from the way Brianna explained it, as a surgical social wound. There was a senior, a boy named Dylan, good-looking, good at sports, soft jaw, Instagram habits, that Brianna had her eye on. Not because she liked him, because he was useful. Someone to claim. Someone to orbit them and reflect their glow. A prize. A person to signal their reach. Dylan had a reputation kind, a little aloof, the kind of guy who smiled and didn't think about the aftertaste of his words. Brianna pointed him out sometimes with that look that meant mine, and people folded around that look like paper. Tonight, they said, they were going to make a show. Lexi raised an eyebrow, waiting for me to ask what the show entailed. I didn't. I already knew, because you learn the vocabulary when you're inside. Making a show meant a curated fight, an orchestrated scandal, the kind of thing that burned a person's social capital to ash and scattered it to the winds. The mechanics were base-level genius if base-level cruelty had a department of engineering, a staged flirtation at a party, a photographer, Brianna's cousin who owed her favors, to get a candid that looked compromising, a whispered rumor, a screenshot that looked like a confession. They wanted to manufacture a bad decision and hand it to the school on a silver platter. It wasn't about Dylan. It was about power and the way excitement rippled through thrones when someone fell down. "I need you to be the catalyst," Brianna said softly. "You're perfect for it." Perfect. The word landed like a coin in a fountain, shimmering with both warmth and weight. Catalyst sounded clinical. It sounded like I would be the match that set a forest aflame. "You'll talk to him," Brianna explained. "Make him notice you. Laugh at his jokes. Make it look like you two are into each other. Don't go too far, just enough. Then, when the photo comes out, we use it. We act hurt and disgusted. We perform being the wounded saints. He'll lose credibility, people will gossip, and we'll be the ones who looked betrayed." They told me it was theater. They told me it was harmless. They told me Dylan was a passing thing, a pawn. They painted it like a scene from an old movie, and in those long, slow descriptions, my morals dissolved into something pliable. I thought about Amber. I thought about the way a rumor could take a life, and how quick people are to forget the face of the person they destroyed once the story has shifted. I thought about my screenshots in that insurance folder and about the 1,000 small cruelty-laced moments I'd watched and not spoken about. The logic in my head was skeletal. If I was the one who helped them, maybe I would never be the one they burned. Maybe I would be safe. So I agreed. We rehearsed. It was humiliating and exhilarating in a way I can barely explain. I practiced laughing at jokes I didn't find funny. I practiced touching Dylan's arm in front of people, in public, like a casual thing. I memorized the safe lines Brianna whispered in my ear. Look surprised but flattered. Look like you had no idea. Be the wounded friend in the end. In the middle of the rehearsals, Lexi leaned toward me and said, almost conversationally, remember, never gain more followers than Brianna. I swallowed. The rule had this weight now, like an instruction manual for a machine that grinds people up into usefulness. We were cogs. I was a cog who smiled and held my breath. The party was at the house of a junior whose parents were rarely home, and whose Instagram was a shrine to fake happiness. It was the kind of place where strangers became immediate friends, and where the lights were low enough to distort the truth. I arrived wearing the outfit Brianna had chosen, an easy balance of careless and curated, and my stomach was a rock. The music was a bass-throbbing pulse, people moving in small clusters like fish. There was beer in plastic cups, cigarettes in ashtrays, people doing the ritual of consumption that's supposed to make you feel older than you are. Dylan was there, laughing with a group of guys. Brianna's cousin, the photographer, shook his head and said nothing. That was the only nod I needed. Brianna had messaged me earlier with the Q word, moonlight. It was childish and sinister. I found Dylan near the back porch, away from the press of bodies, where the night smelled like spilled cologne and damp grass. My nerves trembled, but steadied as I walked toward him, practicing the smile Brianna had shown me in the mirror twice that week. I focused on him the way a runner focuses on the finish line, sharp, narrowed, glassy. We talked for a long time, about classes, about stupid memes, about sports. It was easy to be charming when I pretended to be someone else. It was easy because being someone else let me put on a smile without feeling like it would crack. At a certain point, Brianna's cousin slipped outside and angles crept invisible. He took a few photos, backlit in a way that made it look romantic in a fake kind of way, two people leaning in against an ambient glow. He left without making a sound. The photo would be enough, he'd said. The aftermath would do the rest. Later, as I was leaving the party alone, breathing the clean air like it owed me something, I felt the message come through. "It's live," Brianna wrote, one emoji and nothing else. Then the world changed. The photo leaked. It was everywhere, on Instagram stories that expired but left echoes, on group chats where people screenshot and annotated, on gossip accounts that traded in the currency of shame. It wasn't explicit, not by a long shot, but it was intimate in the way that made people's mouths move. Comments piled on like plates in a restaurant sink. Did they? Ew, why would she? The narrative grew teeth overnight. Dylan was confused for a day, then defensive, then startled, then angry. He messaged me, asking if we'd been seen together. I could almost feel his embarrassment through the text. He asked me why I'd done it, why I would tease something like that when it could ruin a person. He didn't know it was all theater. He didn't know he'd been used. I couldn't tell him the truth. I couldn't tell him that he was a pawn in a chess game, just like I was. I couldn't admit that the cost of my safety felt like his ruin. So I texted back the rehearsed line. I didn't mean anything by it. I swear. Please don't. But the rehearsed line landed like a clap of thunder in a small town. People love a scandal. They rebuild it into something bigger than it is. Within 24 hours, the story had metastasized. Someone, an anonymous account, a cruel algorithm, added a caption implying that Dylan had been pursuing me aggressively, that I had rejected him, and then led him on for my social gain. The tone shifted to moral outrage. The diamonds, who had appeared hurt and shocked, were now the victims. They posted screenshots of their own conversations with me, carefully curated snippets that painted me as manipulative and attention-hungry. The narrative was a blade, and they held it so calmly it glinted in the sun. The school chose sides like you would choose teams for dodgeball. Some kids recoiled at my name like it carried an illness. Others waited to see what else would happen. The rumor engines rumbled. Dylan's friends shrugged at his awkward attempts to explain. The principal called a meeting about student behavior, and the assistant principal asked me to come in and talk. In the middle of it all, the diamonds posted a selfie, 3 faces close together, porcelain smiles, eyes wet as though they'd been wronged. The caption read, "We've been betrayed. Trust carefully." I watched the comments unfurl. Sympathy for them. Condemnation for me. A small voice in my chest urged me to run to Dylan, to tell him the truth, to show him my folder of screenshots, to explain that I'd been coached. But the fear, that old, numbed fear that had been patient and waiting all these months, told me to keep quiet, to stay in the group, to ride the wave and hope it didn't drown me. It was then I realized how easily you could be manipulated not just by people, but by your own survival instincts. You believe lies because they're easier. I began to post like them. I deleted things that didn't fit the new narrative. I changed my privacy settings. I blocked people who messaged me things that made me feel sick. I told myself it would be temporary, that when things settled, I'd set the record straight. But the truth has a way of getting heavy, and pride is a poor buoy. And yet, behind my throat's tightness, my phone's battery on low, my phone's photos folder filling up with evidence, my plan was actually starting. The insurance folder was growing, curated into a narrative of its own. There were screenshots of Brianna deciding not to invite someone to an audition because they weren't edgy enough. There were messages where Lexi called a girl stupid for wearing the wrong shade of lipstick. There was even a video clip where Tasha told someone to leave before you embarrass yourself and then laughed about it later in a different chat. The evidence felt sterile and clinical, like receipts in an affidavit. I polished them, annotated them, and breathed when I looked at them as if they were oxygen. I wanted to believe that if I had enough proof, the story would change, that there could be an undoing. That night, in my room, under a lamp that made shadows look like accomplices, I sat scrolling. The post by the diamonds had swelled into 1,000 comments, each one a judgment. My phone vibrated with notifications, like rain on a tin roof. I felt ridiculous for caring. I felt like someone asleep on a bench in a park, half dreaming about being rescued. And then the first person reached out to me. It wasn't Dylan. It was someone I barely knew, a girl named Margot from my chemistry class. "I don't believe them," she wrote. Simple. No emojis, no lecture. They're full of it. I stared at that message like sunlight on a window. Margot sent another. "You okay?" For the first time in days, I felt something loosening. It wasn't complete relief. Ruin does not unpeel overnight, but it was a crack in the armor of isolation I'd worn so long. I typed, "I'll tell you everything." We met in secret the next day in the library, tucked behind a column where the light was thin and the air smelled of old paper. Margot had this calm look. She wasn't impressed or starstruck. She asked about evidence and the names of people who were colluding. She didn't judge my motives, only took notes, her pen moving like a metronome. "If anyone's going to hear this," she said, "we need receipts." I showed her the folder. Her face didn't flicker with surprise, only a steady concentration that made me feel like I was finally being seen by a human who wasn't performing. "This is good," she said. "We need a plan." That night, for the first time in the whole nightmare, I felt something that tasted like hope. We would gather everything. We would go to the principal. We would confront them. We would, if we were brave enough, go public with the proof of their manipulations. It felt noble. It felt like a fight. And yet, as I thought about it, the practicalities slid around me. The way Brianna could make a lie look like truth with a grin. The way Lexi could weaponize a rumor. The way Tasha could weaponize silence. The plan was brittle, delicate as glass. It took a single misstep to shatter it. That's what fear does. It tells you the worst-case scenario until the worst case becomes the base reality. 2 nights later, the moment of judgment came earlier than I expected. Someone, my guess is Brianna's cousin, smug and efficient, found a way to intercept a message thread. They doctored a screenshot from my phone and posted it to an anonymous account. In it, a fake text conversation showed me admitting to fabricating interactions, to orchestrating Dylan's flirtation for attention. The photo was edited well enough that even my friends hesitated. In the pixels, I looked like a schemer, someone who had used people for clout. The school reacted the way a fish reacts to a sudden hook, immediate, loud, and fatal. Kids I'd eaten lunch with for months turned away. Margot texted me like a small, terrified animal. "Are you okay?" I saw. I didn't respond. My hands were numb. I crawled into bed and pulled the blanket over my head, and for a while, there was only the muffled hum of my neighbors and the batteries of my phone draining to zero. The diamonds posted again, their caption surgical. "It's sad when people lie." I felt like I had been cut into pieces and reassembled badly. The insurance folder, with all its meticulous notes, still existed. But the doctored screenshot had been persuasive because it resembled truth. You can fabricate a crime scene with a few convincing props and the right angle. You can manufacture guilt with the kind of care that predatory people take when they mean to destroy. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run to the principal with my evidence, to lay it out like a legal case. But I knew how these things worked. Authority often chooses the path of least resistance. They liked the headline. They liked a tidy villain. They did not like a messy narrative where the powerful were accused of manipulation. So instead, I did what I had done since the first day I walked into that cafeteria with a tray in my hands. I became small. I waited. I watched. And while I waited, while the school's murmurs turned into a chorus, while Brianna's smile hardened into something predatory and sweet, I made a choice. I could keep pretending I was part of them, let them crush me until there was nothing left, or I could use the very thing I had accumulated: screenshots, timestamps, group chats, receipts, and push back. Not just to clear my name, but to stop them. It was terrifying. It was also, strangely, the most awake I'd felt in months. The fight would not be clean. It wouldn't be pretty. But the edges of me had been ground so smooth. When I went public, I didn't do it with a post or a rant. I didn't scream into the void. I sat down with Margot and a list of people who had been quietly wronged by the Diamonds, girls who had been pushed out of plays, boys who'd had rumors spread about them, students who'd been blackmailed with secrets. We created a document: timestamps, raw screenshots, links, context, witnesses. Margot emailed it to a local online forum, to two of the school's teachers I trusted, and to a journalist friend of her mother who wrote occasionally for the town paper. I expected the principal to call us naive. I expected the school to ask for time to investigate. I expected to be told to be careful, to be patient. What I didn't expect was how quickly the tide could turn when you put a steady stream of evidence into the right hands. Within 48 hours, the narrative began to shift. The town paper ran a piece, measured, factual, about the power dynamics in our school. It quoted parts of our document. It didn't editorialize. It simply printed the messages, the dates, the screenshots. That small act of publication was like opening a window in a sealed room. Fresh air rushed in, and with it, the smell of truth. Suddenly people were calling what Amber had gone through by name: bullying, manipulation, harassment. Other girls sent us their stories. A teacher who had been peripheral before called the district office. The principal, who had been slow to act when it was just a rumor, didn't look as comfortable anymore. Brianna's smile in the selfies began to falter in front of new scrutiny. Lexi's jokes, once delivered with impunity, looked mean in print. Tasha's quiet stare now read as threat. The Diamonds were still powerful, but power without secrecy is brittle. And yet, even as the sun rose on our little scandal, I felt a cold, private terror. They had not been idle. They had built contingency plans. They had friends in the right places. They had a cousin who could edit a screenshot so well it looked like truth, and they had people who would carry a rumor like contraband. When the school called a hearing a formal, administrative thing where parents could attend and everyone sat in a room with fluorescent lights that turned everyone into witnesses, I went with my folder of receipts, an almost tangible weight of proof in my hands. The Diamonds sat across from me, 3 statues in human skin. Their parents smiled like polished coins. The principal's pen scratched its name on forms. We were playing a different game now, legalistic, methodical, terrifying in its mundanity. I spoke. I presented the timeline. I let the messages speak for themselves. I watched faces shift as they saw content they hadn't known existed, the benign jokes that were actually cruelty, the strategic exclusions, the way a rumor had been seeded and tended until it blossomed into a lie. The hearing didn't feel like victory. It felt like opening a wound that everyone had been pretending didn't exist. Some administrators acted surprised. Some students looked away. Some parents clutched their phones as if the screen might bite. Afterward, everyone said the right things: investigations would be launched, sanctions considered, counseling offered. But the undercurrent was loud. This wouldn't be a neat fix. People had been changed. Reputations had been scorched with a slow fire. And then, the aftermath that I hadn't predicted, Brianna turned the game into a spectacle again. She posted on all platforms a video that was polished and perfectly written. In it, she looked tired and brave and wronged. She spoke about betrayal, about how she'd been targeted, about how cruel it was to dox people online. Her words were a mirror polished until they reflected nothing but sympathy. She played the victim in a way that made people weep on command. People who had been on the fence now felt a pang of sympathy for her. The world loves a queen who falls. I watched that video, and for a wild half-second, I felt stupid for ever thinking I was the hero of a story. She had always been better at narrative than I was. She knew how to script empathy. She had practiced smiles and practiced wounding phrasing. She had rehearsed being human. I had typed messages, and the hearing concluded without a knockout punch. The administration issued a statement about community standards and ongoing investigations. They told us to be patient. The diamonds smiled in photos that went up across school social media, flanked by parents who looked like they'd seen this film before. People cheered. People booed. The high school ecosystem churned. For a while, I thought the fight was losing. The weight of public opinion pressed down like humidity. I felt small again, like a pressed flower losing its color. Then something wild happened. A kid, the quiet kid who sat 2 rows behind me in history, the one with hand-me-down hoodies and a habit of doodling, sent me a message. I have a voice memo, he wrote. It's from Lexi. She's talking. She calls you by name. I opened the file with my hands shaking. The voice on the recording was unmistakably Lexi's, fast, theatrical, uncaring. She's only useful because she's gullible, Lexi said, laughing. She'll do anything if you tell her it's insurance. My stomach lurched. When? I typed. When did she say that? 2 weeks ago, the kid replied. You're not in the video. You weren't there. But Lexi said it. It wasn't the only voice memo. More emerged snatches of conversation, careless confessions where the diamonds celebrated the craft of rumor-making like children trading stickers. It hit like a tidal wave. People who had been on the fence listened to tiny files and felt something akin to betrayal, not at me, but at the performance they'd been shown. The town paper published another piece, this one with audio clips and analysis. The school couldn't ignore it. The principal looked shaken. For once, the scales tipped. Brianna changed tactics then. She went invisible. She didn't post. She let the others take the heat publicly. Lexi lashed out, but without Brianna's veneer of control, it all looked more like panic than strategy. Tasha retreated into silence. We were not out of danger. The diamonds could still destroy us in 100 small ways, and they had friends who could plant evidence and weaponize private messages. But the momentum had shifted. The story was no longer just mine. It belonged to other people who had been hurt by the same perfection that once made them untouchable. So that's where part 2 ends, not with the clang of a gavel or a neat resolution, because life doesn't hand you those. It ends with the crescendo, receipts turned into proof turned into public scrutiny, and public scrutiny turning a monolith into a vulnerable thing. I wish I could tell you that standing up felt like victory. It didn't, not yet. It felt like a raw, trembling thing, like a wound finally air exposed. But it also felt like the first time you call out a lie and someone answers back. The diamonds still existed. The rules they'd set, never gain more followers than Brianna, never talk to a boy she claimed, never disagree in public, still hovered in the air like a threat. But the rules began to crack. And the worst part? The most dangerous part? I'd learned how they worked from the inside. Now they knew I'd been collecting too, which meant I had to be smarter than they were. Which, in high school terms, is basically asking a mouse to outwit a pack of wolves. Brianna had this little ritual she called claiming. If she so much as looked twice at a guy, he was suddenly hers. No questions asked. She didn't need to actually date him. She didn't need his consent. She just had to make it clear, off limits. And everyone obeyed. That was the unspoken law of the diamonds. If Brianna claimed someone, you didn't so much as smile at him without risking her wrath. I'd seen it happen before. A sophomore girl accidentally laughed too long at a joke Brianna's current crush told, and within a week, her locker had been graffitied with slut. Her DMs were flooded with threats. She ended up transferring schools by the end of the semester. That's the kind of power Brianna wielded. So when she claimed Ethan, I knew it was trouble. The thing was, Ethan wasn't like anyone else at Northview. He didn't orbit the diamonds. He didn't care about their hierarchy, their clique. Ethan was the first person who made me feel seen without strings attached. Which is exactly why Brianna wanted him. The second she caught wind of him tutoring me, she sauntered over one afternoon, plopped herself at our library table, and draped her arm across his textbook like she owned him. "Hey, Ethan," she purred. "Want to study at my place instead?" My pulse heated. He looked at her politely, then back at me and said, "Nah, I'm good here." I swear, in that moment, I saw something flicker across her face. Not rejection. Brianna didn't even process rejection like a normal person. No, it was possession. He wasn't interested in her, and that meant she had to double down. So she claimed him. Loudly. Publicly. She told Lexi and Tasha, who made sure the whole school knew. Ethan was Brianna's. End of story. Except it wasn't. A week later, Ethan asked me to the winter dance. I thought I'd misheard him at first. We were sitting in the library again, papers scattered everywhere, when he casually said, "So, do you want to go to the dance with me?" My stomach flipped. My first instinct was panic. What if Brianna finds out? My second instinct was thrill. Someone wanted to go with me. Not for status, not for clout, just me. I hesitated, and he noticed. "It's okay if you don't want to," he added quickly. "I just thought it'd be fun." And that's when it hit me. He wasn't asking out of pity. He wasn't asking to make a statement. He just liked me. I wanted to say yes more than I'd ever wanted anything. But the moment Brianna found out, she lost it. She cornered me in the girls' bathroom between classes, her reflection looming behind me in the mirror. "You think you're cute?" she hissed, her lip gloss shimmering as she sneered. "Going behind my back? You think you can just take what's mine?" I swallowed hard. "He's not yours. You've never even dated him." Her eyes narrowed into slits. "That doesn't matter." I claimed him. "And if you go with him, I swear I will ruin your life. You'll wish you never set foot in this school." Something inside me snapped that day. Maybe it was the months of pretending, of laughing at their cruel jokes, of carrying the weight of their rules. Maybe it was the loneliness that still lingered deep inside me, reminding me that this friendship was built on fear, not loyalty. Or maybe it was realizing that Brianna had no power except the power people gave her. So I stopped giving it. That night, I pulled out my secret folder, screenshots I'd been collecting for months. The cruel DMs they sent to girls who broke their rules. The photos they'd taken of people at their worst moments. The rumors they fabricated in the group chat, typing gleefully about destroying reputations. I'd always known, deep down, that I'd need this someday. And now, the day had come. I called it Operation Diamond Dust. Because I wasn't just going to crack them, I was going to grind them down until nothing sparkled anymore. I created an anonymous account and started leaking. Slowly at first. One screenshot here, one DM there. Just enough to make people question. To make whispers spread. Then I dropped the bomb. A full thread of screenshots. Their entire playbook of bullying, manipulation, lies. Proof that every rumor they'd ever spread was calculated. Proof that they'd ruined lives for fun. Within hours, the school was on fire. Teachers called emergency meetings. Parents demanded answers. Students turned on them in droves. The diamonds, untouchable, flawless, powerful, were suddenly radioactive. Brianna tried to spin it. She went live, crying fake tears, claiming the screenshots were doctored. But the receipts were too detailed, too damning. Lexi and Tasha started fighting publicly, throwing each other under the bus. Within 48 hours, the diamonds were finished. And for the first time since I'd arrived at Northview, Brianna wasn't in control. For the first time, I was. After Operation Diamond Dust, my life flipped overnight. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't the loner at the corner table with a squished PB&J. Suddenly, I was the center of gravity. People who had walked past me without so much as a glance were now laughing too hard at my jokes, lingering on every word I said. Girls who used to mock my thrifted sneakers were now DMing me links, asking where I shopped. Guys who'd never known my name were tagging me in memes, sliding into my inbox, begging me to go to the dance with them, even after Ethan and I were obviously together. At first, it was intoxicating. I thought it would feel like justice. Like finally, the universe was balancing the scales. For months, the diamonds had made me small, had forced me to bend myself into whatever shape they demanded. And now, the script had flipped. But the thing about power is, it doesn't feel like justice. It feels like adrenaline, like fire, like something you can't put down once you've tasted it. It started small, almost innocent. A sophomore made a snide comment about how convenient it was that I'd had all that dirt on the diamonds. Later that week, I let it slip to a few people that she'd been caught cheating on a history test. Totally harmless, right? I mean, people cheat all the time. But once the rumor started, it stuck. Her teachers eyed her differently. Her friends whispered behind her back. I told myself she deserved it. After all, hadn't she annoyed me first? Then there was Emily, this bubbly junior who laughed a little too much when Ethan helped her with a group project. She wasn't flirting, not really, but something twisted in my stomach when I saw it. That night, I told 2 trusted friends that Emily had been bragging about hooking up with a college guy who gave her an STD. I didn't expect it to spread so fast. By Monday, she was crying in the bathroom. And yet, instead of guilt, I felt powerful. People started looking at me the way they used to look at Brianna. Careful, hesitant, afraid of being on the wrong side of me. It wasn't intentional, or at least, that's what I kept telling myself. I wasn't mean, not really. I just nudged things, tilted the scales, put people back in their place when they forgot who was in charge now. But deep down, I knew. I hadn't just destroyed the queen bee. I had replaced her. The whispers in the hallway weren't just about how Brianna had fallen. They were about how I'd risen. And the scary part? I liked it. Too much. When teachers called me a strong young woman who stood up to bullies, I smiled sweetly, all while drafting my next little rumor in the notes app on my phone. When parents told me I was a role model, I nodded politely, ignoring the fact that I'd just spread a lie about a girl who borrowed my pencil and forgot to give it back. Power had a taste, and it was addictive. And though I told myself I was different from Brianna, that I was using fear for justice, I started seeing something chilling in people's eyes when they looked at me. Not admiration, not respect. Fear. The same kind of fear the diamonds used to thrive on. The same kind of fear that once kept me small. And the realization hit me like a slap. I hadn't just beaten the monster. I had become it. For weeks after the diamonds crumbled, I walked the halls like I owned them. And in a way, I did. The whispers followed me. The stares lingered. The invitations piled up. Teachers praised me as if I'd done something noble. Parents told their kids to be brave like her. Students treated me with reverence wrapped in fear. But beneath all of that, something gnawed at me. I'd expected Brianna to fight back, to claw her way out of the wreckage, to rebuild her empire brick by brick. That was her brand, unyielding, unbreakable, unstoppable. Except she didn't. After the storm, she simply vanished. She stopped showing up to lunch. She ghosted her little circle of wannabes. She barely posted online anymore. For someone who once lived to be seen, it was like she'd melted into shadows. At first, I thought it was shame. Maybe she couldn't handle the fallout. Maybe she was too embarrassed to face the school she once ruled. But then, I learned the truth. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was scrolling through Instagram when I saw her. Not a throwback, not a filtered repost, an actual fresh post. Brianna, smiling, hand in hand with some guy from Ridgeway High, hair messy like she didn't care for once, grinning in a way I'd never seen at Northview. Carefree. Happy. I stared at the photo for what felt like forever before the caption sank in. Sparkles, new chapter sparkles. And then it clicked. She wanted me to take her down. She'd been failing classes for months. Teachers whispered that her grades were tanking, but no one dared confront her. Her mom, this high-powered lawyer who treated Brianna like a living trophy, expected her to keep up the perfect image. Being queen bee wasn't a choice for Brianna. It was an obligation. She couldn't just walk away. Not without losing face. Not without disappointing everyone who thought she was invincible.